Hello, my name is Peter Mackenzie-Philps, and this is a tape on advanced fly tying. Now, in the basic fly tying tape, we discussed tools, knots, and why we tie flies in the first place. In this tape, we shall show you some of the wrinkles, dodges, and ways of saving time or money, which I have gleaned from about 40 years of fly tying and watching other people tying flies. And believe me, I have learned far more from watching other people than I ever have struggling away on my own. Not in any particular order, as it is a bit diverse and covers many techniques. I hope that in this tape you'll discover some of the facets of the art which will increase your pleasure in tying or dressing flies to catch lots of fish with. The average amateur tying a fly will use about 10 inches of silk on the actual fly, and he will start with a short waist end. Having tied it in, lets everything go, reaches for his scissors, cuts that waist end off, throws away 2 inches, and then carries on tying the fly. Now, a professional will do it another way. A professional will have a longer end, probably 3 or 4 inches waist. He'll start by starting the silk, like so, and as soon as he's trapped that waist end, he'll break it, like so, and so he throws away 4 inches. Now, if you think that if you use 14 inches instead of 10, you get 128 flies instead of 180 from a 50-yard reel. And so the economical way to do it from the amateur's point of view is to start with a very short waist end, tie the silk on like so, and have such a short waist end that it will disappear under the body material as you tie the fly, and you don't waste very much at all. That way you can get 52 more flies from a reel of silk. Sometimes we want to tie a small fly, and we have available either hair, and the tying of a hair hackle is an art in itself, or we have a very large feather and we want a small hackle from it. Can be maddening, especially with a packet of partridge hackles where we want to tie a size 16 partridge and orange, for instance, and we only have great big feathers. So how to tie small hackles with either hair or big feathers. Starting, therefore, with a little bit of silk on the hook, and then we pick up the only available feather we have, and let's assume that it's this great big red hackle here. Now, this hackle is far too large for a fly that size, and so what I do, I stroke the feather all the way down like that. I take chunks off all the way down. Each time I take a chunk off, I feed it in like so, and again like so, and I've now got a fingerful of fibers from that side of the feather. Turn it over, another fingerful, and another grab. And each time I put the roots all level with each other, and so I've now taken a great bunch of fibers, which I can now neaten up into a bunch. And the tips are more or less level. If they're not, I just stroke them like so until they are. Now, having got that like that, I can tie those in, pointing over the eye of the fly, change them over, remember, like so, tie them there with 2 loose turns. No, that's a bit long, there we are, 1, 2, and tighten up. And you see that they migrate around the hook, but there's a blank piece there. So I'll just get another feather, great big one, and I'll put some more on. Right. Make sure that the tips are level, offer them to the body too, and take a couple of turns. Now, what I've done now is to surround the whole of the shank of the hook with fibers of feather. And you see how much too long they are. So if I now cut those there, take the silk along. This is a purely imaginary fly. There's no fly that is in the pattern books that looks quite like this. But I'm only using nice bright colours so that you can see what I'm doing. And I'll put a body on. Let's say it's hare's fur. Hare's mask, bit of hair, dub it on, lash it on. The body, in fact, is not important. The principle I'm trying to explain is how to make small hackles out of big feathers. Let's just lash that on and make it look like a nice hairy body. There we are. And just get rid of some of the excess. Now, what I do now is to push my finger against those hackles and stroke them all back, quite brutally, Back that way, look. Back they come. Stroke them back. Take the silk to the front. Holding all the fibres back, I tie a head, quite a bulky head, in front. I could, if I want, dub something on, but a silk head will do. When I let go, I've got a small hackle, look, made out of a big feather. Now you can use that principle with hair as well, and you can tie yourself hackles from a hare, or any kind of hair. It could be squirrel tail, it could be the guard hairs of a hare's mask, but most useful perhaps is the technique of getting a nice small neat partridge hackle out of a big partridge hackle, because most of the partridges that I've ever seen have more big hackles on them than little hackles. And there we are. Small hackles out of big feathers. There is a way of tying two hooks together to make a tandem lure, which is very strong. It does not use super glue, it doesn't crimp the nylon, and there's a knack to it. You end up with a tandem lure which is so strong that if it hooks the bottom, it'll stop a Rutland boat in a good wind. Tandem lures have got to be strong. There is no point whatever in having a weak link between two hooks, because Sid's law says that the fish will grab the rear hook and pull the nylon away, and you'll be left with a single hook lure where you thought you had two, and the fish has taken the rear hook. Now to do this, you start tying the nylon well along the hook shank. Lash it down. When you get to near the end of the body, where the end of the body of the fly is going to be, double that end back like so and tie it down again. Like that. Now you can, if you're fussy, use touching turns all the way. It isn't really necessary if you've done it properly. This is 18-pound nylon, and I've coloured it black so that you can see it. But there we are, we've got to the head now, and I'll do a whip finish. 1, 2, 3, 4, and pull. Right, I now take off the end of the thread, and I remove the waste end of nylon. I've now got the rear hook ready to tie a fly on, and if I wanted to, if I was tying a tandem lure, I would normally tie the fly on that part. Having done that, I then come to the front hook. Put that in the vise, get in. Right, now I start my silk again, the wasteful way this way, this time. I'm in a hurry. Right, I now tie, judge for length, about there I should guess for this particular fly. Try and make sure that the rear hook is sitting upright and start attaching the nylon. There. Take the silk along to the tail and back again. Check that the rear hook is sitting correctly. That'll do. Right. Come back all the way along to near the head. There. Too far. There. Leave plenty of room for the head of the fly. And now come back and fold the nylon back and lash it down again. And back again. And a whip finish and finish off. 1, 2, 3, 4, and pull. Cut off the waste end of the silk, cut off the waste end of the nylon, and I now have a tandem lure which is very, very strong. It cannot pull apart. See how I'm bending that front hook? Oh, that will not. It's broken the hook in the vise, and yet it did not break the 18-pound nylon. If I was to fish with that, with say 8 or 10-pound nylon on my leader, I would have absolute confidence that those two hooks would never pull apart. The next fly is a parachute fly. For this we really need a third hand, and so a thing called a gallows tool or a sky hook was invented, and all it does is to act as a third hand, holding part of the fly out of the way while we work on the rest of it. It is essential that because parachute flies are normally dry flies, they are as light and buoyant as possible, and so we don't use any extra materials if we can possibly help it. And the way I'm going to show you adds no weight at all to that of an ordinary dry fly. A lot of people think that a parachute hackled fly makes a very successful dry fly. I agree entirely with them. My favourite dry fly pattern, in fact, has a parachute hackle. The knack of tying a parachute hackle is an art in itself. No extra materials are needed, just the right way of doing it, and you will have an almost indestructible parachute fly. Start by putting the silk on the body, 1/3 of the way along. Having locked the silk on, reach for your wing material. In this case, it's the grey hair of a mink, pale grey. Cut a great bunch. You'll see that I've got guard hairs and fluff, underfluff. I don't want the underfluff, so I get a hold of it and just gently tease it out. I don't throw it away though. It's useful dubbing material, and I save that, and I now have a nice little bunch made up only of guard hairs. Change fingers by stroking your thumbs together and tie that in, pointing over the eye at that 1/3 point along the body. Then, just to finish things off neatly, tie in the waist ends of the body material as you go along the body. That adds bulk, which helps a dry fly to float, and yet it doesn't add much weight. Little piece of wool just to make the body look neat. And here we go. Take the silk back to there. Wind the wool, just so that it looks as if it's got a body. I would normally put a tail on as well, but in this case, you know how to tie a tail in, just a bunch of fibres. And there we are. We've now tied a body. Get rid of the waist end. Right. We're now ready to put the hackle on. Take a feather, in this case a big badger hackle, get rid of the fluffy bit at the base, like so, and tie that in so that the hackle stem lies along the wing material. You'll see why in a moment. Tie it in with several good turns. Now take everything up in the air and take the silk to the front and tie a few turns in front there, just to help all that wing material sit upright when I let it go. Now, we're ready now for the gallows tool, or sky hook as some people call it. Hook the hackle pliers on, grab all the wing material and the hackle fibre, the stem of the hackle. Right, we're now ready for a second pair of hackle pliers on the hackle itself. And we wind that hackle around the base of the wing and its own stem. Now that is most important. All on the same point, as low down the wing roots as we can get. Keep winding, keep winding, keep winding. Nice bushy hackle. When we think we've got enough, we leave the feather hanging in front. Take the silk from underneath where it's been hanging on the spigot bobbin holder and tie it in front. So now we're tying in the waist end of the hackle in front and below the wing roots. Tweak the end away, and we've now finished with the gallows tool. Just get that out of the way and slide the spring away. Now, what I now must do is to bring the stem of the hackle down, hold the wing up, bring the stem of the hackle down in front, pull everything back out of the way, and tie that stem in. And by doing so, I am locking in every turn of hackle with the stem of the hackle itself. It cannot therefore migrate up the wing. One of the commonest causes of parachute flies failing is for the hackle to migrate up the wing and the fly to come apart. And then all we have to do, cut off the waist end of the hackle feather and put a couple of half hitches in front with a half hitch tool. 3. And if I now put a blob of varnish underneath, that is an almost indestructible parachute fly. If I'd wanted a pattern without a wing, I would just have wound it around its own stem and then brought the stem down and tied it in, just the same. Marvellous fly, parachute fly, but tie it the right way. You would be amazed how many people have told me that they find that spider pattern dry flies work just as well as winged dry flies. And if the truth were known, they say that because they don't know how to put wings on a dry fly and therefore never do. And there are times when a winged dry fly will either catch more fish or give you more satisfaction looking at it in the fly box. This is how to do it. Dry fly wings are very easy once the basic principle is grasped. I use feathers, and for dry flies I would normally use starling feathers, but so you can see what I'm doing, this is a mallard quill and I'm tying on quite a large hook. Now the drill is that you choose a hook one size smaller than the hook you're tying on. So if that's a 12, this would be a 14. And having prepared the feather, you just reach in and take a slip of feather the width of the gape of the hook one size smaller than the one you're tying on. Having separated the fibres with your automatic hook width gauge, tear it off. Now I've already done one, and so now I've got two slips here, both the same width, and I put them so that they curve apart, look. Now that's the way to tie them on a fly. Now I believe that dry fly wings should perk up right nicely, and so I put the long end on top. Now hold them tightly, thumb and finger, up one side, down the other, and pull. Up one side, down the other, and pull. Third time. Now I can do almost anything I like with those wings from now on, providing no turn goes further back than those pinch and loops. So I'll just show you what I mean. If I get a hold of the waist ends and remove them, there we are. I can now be as brutal as I like, lifting the wings forwards and taking some turns behind. Like so. They're now upright. And if I just slide my dubbing needle in from the top, they separate and I have a nice pair of wings. And now I would normally carry on, tie the tail, the ribbing, the body, and then finally finish up with the hackle and end up with a nice dry fly, providing most of the turns of hackle were behind the wings to hold them upright like that. It's so simple, but remember the dodge of using a hook one size smaller than the hook you're tying on. Many years ago, a man called Waddington invented a kind of salmon fly, not on the standard kind of hook, but on a metal shank with a treble hook behind it. To buy these metal shanks nowadays is very expensive sport, and I'm going to show you how to make them out of paper clips. Now the Waddington shank, as I said, is just a length of metal on which to tie the fly. And if we study this one in close-up, you'll see it's a standard teal blue and silver with a palmered body hackle, and it's got a little treble at the tail with a bit of dressing on it. There is also a piece of nylon tied under the dressing of the treble and carried on along the body. That just holds the treble still and keeps it in line when you're fishing with it. Now how to make one of these is very simple. Get a small panel pin or a small nail and put it in the jaws of your fly tying vise. Then take a standard paper clip, Mark 1 paper clip, and straighten it out, and take a small pair of pliers and just take the kinks out of the wire, like this. Here we go. Come on. Sometimes these little kinks don't want to come out, but there we are. Right. Now, if we now take that and bend it around the nail in the fly tying jaws and get the pair of pliers and just squeeze one side of the nail, lift off. We then come to the other end of the paper clip and we bend that in such a position so that there is an overlap in the wire in the middle of the body there, most essential, and we grip there. What we have done now is to make ourselves a Waddington shank, and I would normally do, say, 20 of these at a time. Then I'd take the nail out of the vice jaws and I would feed the treble onto the shank on one of the loose ends. Get it in to the eye at the end there. Then I grip the eye metal in the vice jaws, if I can disengage myself from this rather sharp treble. Now get that in there and lay the treble hook out of the way. Take a piece of thread and lash the whole lot together. That's why the overlap is so essential. Come up the body here. Now, if you want to, you can varnish those turns, but I wouldn't, because the next stage, in fact, is to take a piece of nylon and tie it along the body of the shank, the Waddington shank, and along the shank of the treble. Having done that, you're ready to tie a perfectly standard salmon fly on the body you've made. When the fly wears out, get a pair of wire cutters, cut the eye of the Waddington shank, use the treble again, and you have Waddington shanks on the cheap. Sometimes when we're tying a fly like a daddy longlegs, we want to tie a buoyant fly. The best way of doing this is to use deer hair for the body and tie a hollow deer hair body to be tied on the hook as a detached body, and the result is a fly so lifelike that real daddy longlegs will come along and try and mate with it. Dry flies, like daddy longlegs, to be used in a good rolling wave, have to be as buoyant as possible. One way of doing this is to use a hook smaller than the body length would dictate, and to tie a detached body on with a fairly lightweight hook underneath it. And a good detached body can be made out of deer hair. Now, the way to do this, start by putting a needle in the fly tying vise. Be very careful of that sharp point there. Take a small piece of deer hair, and this is the hair from a roe deer winter skin, nice and buoyant and hollow. Take the fly tying silk and grip that also between the finger and thumb which is holding the deer hair, and take a few loose turns. Now, if you pull too tightly, the deer hair will splay like that, and it'll be difficult to work with afterwards. So loose turns, and when you've got several loose turns on, you can get a little bit more silk, like so, and you work the silk along the body, like that. When you've got the length of body you require, you start going back again. Having got to the end, where you started the silk there, you tie a knot, and because the material has flared out a bit, the way to tie a knot is to do a half hitch put on that way, and then held tight, behind, and pull. Now the body is now complete. You slide it off the needle. Don't cut the silk, because you're going to use that to tie it onto the hook with. And then you trim the end of the body here, like so, any extraneous ends. You now have a body ready to be tied on. I'll take off that waist end of silk while I'm at it. There. So I've now got a body ready to be tied on. I take the needle out of the vise, put a hook in, and I offer my detached body onto the hook. Here we go. It wants to be tied on that way, remember. Loose turns to start with. Tighten up slowly once you've got some turns on. There, and there's a detached body. If you like, you can leave all that fuzz as a hackle and lash the silk on good and tight. And there's a daddy longlegs. Other refinements, of course, are tying in legs made of knotted cock pheasant centre tail fibres, and to colour the body with a spirit felt pen. For some salmon flies, and for some lures as well, we hear about using doubled body hackles. Doubling a hackle is a knack, and there is an easy way. Here it is. Doubling a hackle in the old days involved holding the hackle in the fingers and pulling it that way. There is a much easier way of doing it, by putting the butt of the hackle in the jaws of the fly tying vise, holding the tip of the hackle, and stroke first of all the fibres out at a right angle. Then you come round with your fingers, and the shiny side of the hackle is facing me, remember, and I stroke all the hackle fibres quite violently back out of the way. And what I'm trying to do is to get those fibres to lie in a sharp V with the good side out both sides. And there it goes, look. It's now called a doubled hackle. And to use it is very simple and is the next stage. I would normally double hackles in a batch so that I had several hackles already, because while a hackle's in the fly tying vise, of course, you can't have a hook in there. So there we are. There is a doubled hackle, all in a nice V, ready to tie on a fly. I've got a fly ready, and it's here. I've tied in the tail, the floss body material, and the ribbing, and I will now tie the doubled hackle in. It is very important that you tie the tip in out of the way of the doubled bit, like so, look. And the doubled bit starts outside the tying silk. Take the silk along to the front here and finish where I'm going to finish the body. Now, floss next. And I've tied a strand of floss in double, so I get twice the thickness at each turn. Keep stroking it between your fingers, otherwise it doesn't lie flat. It'll go in bumps if it twists. So keep stroking it along the body, like that, as it winds. Some people advocate twisting it if it separates, but that causes a bump and I don't like doing it. So if it separates, I leave it separated. I come along until I'm there and I'm now ready to tie that in. Not a beautiful body, but it'll do. Cut off the waist end, there, and I now follow with the ribbing. Now the ribbing should not be in too many turns. Nice wide open spiral is best for a salmon fly, and 4 or 5 turns are plenty usually. To there, where I tie that in as well. And I lash that down firmly because oval ribbing like this has a mind of its own sometimes. Right, I'm now ready to bring the doubled hackle up the body, following along the line of the ribbing, close behind each turn of ribbing. And I want that doubled hackle. I'm just going to double it again because there's a couple of strands there have come away. Right, it's doubled. Come up and follow the line of the ribbing. It is essential that each turn of hackle lies tucked in close behind each turn of ribbing. Here it comes. Just stroke it out of the way if it looks awkward. And we are now, just a minute, one more errant strand there, and we're now there. Now we've doubled that hackle and we've tied it in all the way. And it's now a nice proud body hackle, which I'm going to clip off at the front and stroke all that lot back. And there's a nice looking salmon fly body. Right, we're now ready for a beard hackle and then the wing. But I'll just tie a little knot there. Right, I'll tie another one. See how I did it? Hook over the top, finger on, and back. Now I'm going to leave that fly now. I'll come back to it at the end of the tape. When I look in somebody else's fly box, I learn a great deal about that man and the way he ties his flies. We all do. Some wet flies in particular always annoy me because in my humble opinion the wings are put on upside down. I know some of you may wonder whether there is a right way up and a wrong way up for wet fly wings, but I'd like to show you the difference. Now the appearance of a wet fly or a dry fly is greatly influenced by the way the wings are tied on. There is a great deal of difference in appearance between that fly and that fly. The only difference in practicality is which way the wings are tied on. Whether you tie them on long side on top or short side on top. That way or that way. Now in my view, long side on top makes a nice sleek looking fly like this one, and long side underneath or short side on top ties an amateurish looking fly as we often see on imported flies like this one. The other thing, when that wing frays, you lose the silhouette on the top. When this wing frays, it still looks sleek. And I think that's very important in fishing. So please remember, long fibre on top for a sleek looking fly. There is a way of putting a floss body on a hook which saves a lot of time and a lot of material. Fluorescent floss is very useful on flies, but once it gets wet it goes almost semi-transparent. And here are 2 hooks. One I have prepared and one I have not. I've wetted it and you will see that that is much darker and less attractive looking than the bright glowing floss on this. It's the same floss, but one hook I have prepared and one hook I have not. And how do I prepare them? Very simple. Put a hook in the vise, take some of the white paint that typists use to paint their mistakes out, and just paint a hook. And it's as simple as that. Now I'll set that aside to dry. I'll put in a prepared hook now. There we are. And some floss. And watch how it glows from the moment it touches that body. Notice how the turns are running in touching turns because I'm holding the waist end up at an angle. I've left one little gap. I'll go back to that later. I'll leave the white at the end for you to see. But if I just go back there and cover that space up and cover that space up and go back to the front, you can see how that glows because I've prepared the hook. Preparation, very important. There is a way of adding sparkle to some of our flies using a material called mylar tubing. It's sold under various trade names, but there is a knack to using it. A standard baby doll, and this is a blue one, which is a favourite colour of mine for sea trout, can be transformed by the addition of some mylar tubing. Mylar tubing comes with a very tough rope inside it, and so you cut the mylar with the roots of your scissor blades. You do not use the fine points. And to get the rope out, you just slide it along a bit, hold the rope, and take it off. We now have a little tube of pearl mylar. Put that on the hook, slide it along the body until it sticks out well to the tail. And to make sure that it's going to be right, just get your dubbing needle and undo the braiding at the tail end. Right. Now we take the fly tying silk and we take a loose turn or two around and then tighten up. If we try and do it tight right at the beginning, it does not work. Now, we've locked all that on there. I can now break that end away or cut it if it won't break. There we are. And now I can do a few more turns just to make certain. And then a whip finish, because by opening my fingers out, I can do a perfectly good whip finish at the tail end of the fly. Like so. 4 turns, finger on, pull tight, and cut it. Right. Now, the secret now is to pull that as tightly as you dare along the body and cut it right at the eye, under tension. There's the eye, cut it there, and it'll draw back a fraction. So now when I get my fly tying silk and I take a couple of loose turns around there, and I do mean loose, then pull tight, I've actually locked it all on and it hasn't leapt off, the silk hasn't leapt off the front of the fly. Now, if I lash all that down, you'll find that it's cleared the eye, and I can now tie a nice big black head on this sea trout fly. Just keep winding until all the ends of the mylar disappear, and then I do a whip finish in front. And I think you'll agree that the addition of that pearl mylar tubing over the top of the fly, so that the colour of the fly shows through, adds a lovely sparkle to it and makes it a really cracking, glowing sea trout catching fly. Looks just like a little fish. You can, of course, use this technique on any colour of baby doll you like. And for brown trout, my favourite is the pink one. For sea trout, my favourite is the blue one. And for rainbows, whatever the colour of the day is. Makes an incredible difference to the impression that the fish gives, though. Little fish glittering with scales. A little knack, putting a flying treble on a larger hook. Often makes the difference in sea trout fishing whether you catch the tail nibblers or not. And all you do is you feed the nylon through the eye there, around the bends of the hooks, and through the eye again. This is 18-pound nylon on a fairly large treble, about a size 12 treble. Now, having done that, you then bind the nylon to the shank of the treble. It doesn't have to be lashed on really hard because it can't go anywhere. It's round the bends. Do a whip finish. 1, 2, 3, 4, and tighten up. I would normally now varnish that little whipping. But then the secret is to put another whipping immediately in front of the eye. There, to hold those 2 strands of nylon together. And this is the tricky one, so do it gently and as close to the eye as you can. Like so. It's not really intended to be durable. It doesn't really matter if this one comes off. So I do a little knot now, there. That's where it's going to be. Just put a half hitch on. Get it round. Right. There. That's it on. Right. Now that is really a temporary whipping on there, just to make it easier to work on the big hook when I come to it. Cut that off there too. Now, the next stage is to put the big hook in the vise, start the silk near the tail, get a hold of the treble that I've already prepared, and I want it to be about, say, there. Pinch and loop, pinch and loop. Right, and now I go up the shank of the hook, lashing it down to about there. I double that back again, remember how I did the tandems, and I lash it down again. And I find that that treble hook has a magnetism for my fingers, and the sharper it is, the more magnetic it seems to be. Cut off the waste ends of the nylon, and now I have a treble which will never come off, and I'm ready to tie a fly on the large hook, having got a flying treble to catch the tail nippers. Very effective, and it does lie fairly straight, because there are two strands of nylon coming from one either side of the eye of the treble. Now earlier on we half finished a fly. I'm going to finish it off now, and I'll show you how to save money by not having to buy feathers at all for beard hackles. So here's our salmon fly partly finished, and to show you that you don't have to use feather for the beard hackle on a fly, here is a blue squirrel tail. What I'm going to say now will, I am sure, make sure in your mind that you say to yourself, if I have a collection of dyed squirrel tails and I only tie beard hackles on my salmon flies, I don't need feathers as well in all those colours. So here's a piece of blue squirrel tail, hold it underneath, loose turn, without trapping any of that body hackle, 2 loose turns. There we are. Now if you hold it underneath and tighten up, you do not need to turn the hook upside down in the vise to put a beard hackle on. It's there, look. What's the matter with that? Then get a hold of all the loose ends and cut them off. There. Let's trim that. Right. So I put the beard hackle on. Let's just make sure it all lies neatly. Right, there are a couple of strands of blue sticking up there, not to worry. I now get brown hair for the wing of the fly. And I want fairly long hair on this fly because it should come somewhere around the point of the tail. And so halfway up the tail there is longer hair than there is at the roots. And I take a small bunch of that. There we are. Put these tails out of the way. I now have a bunch of hair. Measure it for length. There, hold it in my fingers, get that bit of hackle out of the way, a couple of loose turns, and tighten. There we are. And I now have a hair wing salmon fly look with a brown wing, blue beard hackle, a red doubled body hackle, floss body with a gold oval rib, and a nice little sparkling tail made of golden pheasant toppings. And that's not a bad little fly. And if I was to varnish the head now, just tie a few more turns to make it look really neat. There we are. And there's a salmon fly. It's got a nice sparkle to it. I don't know whether it's a regular pattern or not, but half the fun of fly tying is to invent your own patterns, and that's just what I've done with this fly here. So all we need to do now is to put a bit of varnish on the head. Just a lick, gives it a nice shine. Don't bung the eye up. And there it is. Super. So we've finished this session of fly tying. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you're keen on improving your skills, join the Fly Dressers Guild. You'll find that they're a nice bunch of people. They have regular monthly meetings in many parts of the country, and you will enjoy your fly tying much more if you do it in the company of others. I wish you tight lines, screaming reels, and fun in your fly tying. Goodbye.